Hi, I'm Paul Stringfellow, and welcome to this week's Tech Takeaways podcast. And as always, I'm joined by my more than dynamic co-hosts, Jason Fitzgerald.
Hello.
And Wayne Miller.
Hello.
And on this week's show, we've got a special and returning guest. We've got Grant Caley from NetApp. Hi, Grant.
Hi, Paul. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Well, welcome back to the show. Feels like you've never been away.
Yes, never left.
Yeah, it feels like we've all been here. And it's amazing that we've all got the same clothes on we had last week. I don't know how that happens. Just one of those things, limited wardrobe. So on this week's show, we wanted to kind of get Grant's insight a little into kind of the modern way that we look at data, kind of the evolving world of data. I think we've all moved on from the idea that, it's just stuff you store on a Windows file server on a NetApp storage array. We've kind of all moved on from that. And actually we're using data in much more interesting and intriguing ways, and looking increasingly how we do more with data than we've done in the past, because it's the thing that's helping us to drive kind of innovation, drive the way we work with our customers, drive decision making, all of those kind of things. But before we get into that, and for people who haven't seen the previous show we did with Grant, and do look for it on our many channels where you can find our podcast. Grant, do you want to give a little brief intro to who you are, what it is you do at NetApp?
Yeah, sure. So I've been with NetApp for over 20 years now. I do a chief technologist role, as well as managing a couple of our technical teams. So I get the really pleasant job of telling our customers, partners, anybody who'll listen, actually. So thank you for inviting me on, about the wonderful things that NetApp does around about data management and how we help our customers deliver that.
And so, I suppose, 20 years, it's a long time at NetApp and working in kind of the storage and the data industry. So, how have you seen that kind of space change? How, from what people used to ask about, what are the kind of modern challenges that you're trying to address?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think if you look back 20 years ago, the question was just, can you store our data and how fast can we get access to it? Those were really the kind of attributes that people were looking for. But I think what's really happened over the last decades is that the data management that sits outside of that, around about how do you secure the data, how do we make that data more integrated with our applications, those types of questions have started to come in, and those are what we've been building into the platform. So instead of those being external things that you did, they're now actually part and parcel of the storage offering that you can buy nowadays. So security is not an add-on, it's an integrated feature and capability. Integration with applications is an integrated feature, or it should be. I'm not saying every vendor is the same, but certainly from a NetApp perspective. So I think from that perspective, we're seeing that layer take on more responsibility, which really kind of offloads that responsibility from further up. You can integrate, and you still have to, with other layers for security and other things, but it needs to be part of a combined solution, not just, we have a firewall and that provides our security. Now that's not enough. Things like the storage has to provide that security of data and be the last line of defense almost in that type of environment.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, because I think we'll often talk, won't we, about kind of security. Security is a multi-layered threat, so there's lots of ways that cyber attacker is going to try and attack your infrastructure, and then we talk about how we should be securing at multiple layers, so at the perimeter, at the clients, etc. But actually, I think we very rarely talk about the idea of doing this at that kind of, almost that foundational layer, the kind of storage layer, and I think it's a really interesting area.
Because this is what they're trying to attack, isn't it? The data. This is
Ultimately
what they want to be compromised. Yeah.
And is that? I mean, how do you see that? Do you see? Is that like almost a light bulb moment when you talk to somebody about that, or does it make absolute sense to them?
Yeah, and actually this year it's become more of a conversation point than ever before, because I think people have realised that it's not a question of if you'll be attacked, it's a question of when you'll be attacked. Pretty much every organization in some shape or form has suffered some form of malware attack or ransomware attack, and we've seen how expensive those are. It's actually it costs more often just to kind of recover from that situation than the attack itself sometimes causes in terms of damage. So people are really concerned about it. And to your point, Wayne, it is about the fact that the storage is the last line of defense. It's what people are trying to get to. They're not trying to get to the application, they're trying to get to the data that the application holds. So being able to build a capability into the data storage layer that protects that last line of defense, if you like, is really important in terms of protecting, the environment customers have.
Yeah, I mean, data is valuable, isn't it? If you look at what differentiates company A from company B, it's the data that they hold, and that data has a value to those. Could be intellectual property or designs for something or whatever. What are the NetApp technologies that are allowing that kind of protection?
Yeah, so actually, So the way I put it into a story, I suppose, is we kind of term it in frames of the NIST framework, which is that's the American kind of standard for how you look at cybersecurity, cyber resilience.
Yeah.
And that really falls into, there's actually more than I can remember, but there's, can we identify what data we have first? Because before you can build a strategy, you need to know what you've actually got. And NetApp, in that respect, have our Blue XP classification tool, which enables customers to analyze the data they have, look at the security of it, look at whether they've got cold and redundant data, so optimize it at the same time, but then look at the compliance and the privacy, whether it contains personal information. So if you don't do that analysis up front, you've got no idea what you need to build on top of that. So that's very much the first part of what we do.
So we can get visibility about what's actually being stored to begin with. So that's things like, GDPR data, isn't it? Personal identifiable information. Do you need to have that sitting on NetApp to be able to do that?
No, that's a good thing about the tools which we bring into this space is it works across any platform. So it can be on-premise storage, it can be cloud storage, it can be SharePoint, OneDrive. It even looks into things like Oracle and SQL and other NoSQL databases. So it's actually looking out there much wider and across any platform, any vendor. So it's not specific to NetApp. It's actually something which actually most companies and customers should be doing anyway, because it's a prerequisite to building any form of security or cyber resilience posture.
And I think that's a really good point, actually, about this is a kind of a thing that people should be doing. I mean, are you still seeing that in your CTO role? Were you seeing that when you talk to other CTOs or CISOs that actually they still really don't have a handle on that because it's difficult?
I think we just relied on the mechanisms we had in place in the past. And now, because the attack landscape is so much more advanced and much more complex, and you can go and buy these packages on the dark web. You can go and buy a hack package and pay for it and then point it at an environment. So now, CISOs and CEOs and CIOs have realized that they need to be much more advanced, and they need to know, you can't just put everything across everything to protect it. You need to be much more specific so that you build higher security areas for certain types of data. Other types of data, you can have different environments. And if you push data into the cloud, you need to understand what you're pushing in there, because it's a whole new silo of configuration management you have to handle and deal with. And that creates a lot of challenges in itself. So you need to understand the data before you can even start to put any other capabilities in place on top of that.
And I think that's a good point, actually, about kind of moving to the cloud, because there's a whole piece around cost optimization when we're doing that. If we're just going to pick up all the data that we've ever created and stick it in the cloud, when we do that on-prem, I use this conversation all the time, but when you do this on-prem, the purchase of storage on-prem is kind of a once every 5 year thing. And then there's lots of pain when people tell you how much it's going to cost, and people go, well, I need this much and I need a bit more. And then there's this whole painful conversation. But then everybody forgets about it because you go through all the pain, and then 5 years later you go through the pain again. But as you move it to cloud, that whole thing kind of changes, doesn't it? Because you're seeing that pain every single month that somebody's coming along and going, why is my AWS bill so big? It's because we've just dumped data in there and nobody's get any insight to it.
Yeah, and that's actually the other part of the tool. It's not just about the classification of the data so that you know what's personal, what's in the focus of regulations, etc. But actually it helps you optimize the data so that as you move to new environments, you don't take all the same garbage that you had before. Because when you move it to the cloud, you'll end up paying for that excess. So you really do need to be optimized in how you optimize the data before you even look at moving it into the cloud and other environments. So that's, again, another feature that the tool can help you with.
Well, what does that optimization look like? You're looking at the number of files that are the same. You're looking at kind of stale data. What does optimization look like?
Yeah. So optimization really is looking at, it scans all the data. It looks at what's cold, what's not been accessed, what's duplicate, redundant, what maybe doesn't require to be a high performance and could sit on different tiers of storage from a cost perspective. There's a whole raft of optimization mechanisms you can do. Most of it is actually just reducing the amount of data, because they reckon, there's an estimate I read, which is quite frightening, is that all of the data that we create, 68% of that data is never used again. Now somebody's paying for that. You're paying for it in power, cooling, footprint in your data center. You move that to the cloud, you're paying for that on an OPEX basis. Right. Every month you'll get a bill for 68% of all that junk that you're not actually using. Yeah. So it's really important to take these kind of steps. And actually, customers for the first time are actually now prepared to delete data, whereas 2 years ago, 3 years ago, nobody would take ownership. But that's not the case now. People are actually actively looking at how they manage that data, and deletion of data is part of that strategy, or should be part of that strategy.
And I think you raise a really interesting point, actually, because you talked about kind of that amount of data that you have, needing power, needing cooling. As more of us, and as we should be, become more aware of the sustainability requirements we have, not just as companies, but as people and as a planet. The data can be that kind of idea of the amount of data that we create. It can play a huge part in that.
Yeah, and you've got two options really. You've got three options actually. You can optimize it, as we just talked about. Reduce the amount of data you've got. That's one way. You can store it on technologies that physically give you much higher density per disk effectively, and capacity flash, these types of technologies, and that helps reduce your CO2 emissions because of reduced power and cooling. Or you can move it to the cloud, and the reason that's sometimes effective is because the clouds, and it's a loose way of looking at it, but the clouds are more efficient in their running of data centers. They use renewable energies for all of that. So if you're looking at purely from a planet perspective, the cloud can be an option for some customers, and also it removes it from being on your scope 1 and 2 emissions, which is how they measure it, to actually putting it onto somebody else's scope,
make it somebody else's
emissions, which is, it's a weird way of looking at it, but it can make a difference for some customers.
Yeah, and as you say, at scale, actually, the cloud providers can be much more efficient in doing that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just as it was kind of come to the end of our time here, I suppose, we've talked about kind of optimization, we've talked about security. Is there any other big drivers that you're seeing kind of in your general conversations around data?
Yeah, I think, AI is a big one this year in particular. I mean, with ChatGPT and generative AI, companies are suddenly realizing that they can more easily get value out of the data which they have within their organization. So that's one of the conversations. But the challenge with that is that you can point these kind of tools at public information, but you also want to point it at your confidential, secure information. So we do have a lot of conversations now about, okay, we want to do that, but we maybe want to do it in Google. How can we bring our secure information into Google and process it alongside other public data sets that are available? So those are some of the challenges which customers have, and that's some of the ones which we talk to them about, because NetApp's ability to make that happen at the data layer on-prem and cloud certainly drives a lot of conversations in that respect. I think the other thing that people are, broader to the, optimizing data, there's also the securing the data much wider than we've talked about. It's not just about identifying what you've got. You need to be able to detect ransomware attacks. You need to be able to protect against those. And actually, the more important part of it is how fast you can recover from those attacks. So those types of conversations are coming up more often as people look at, more resilient technologies, building more resilient environments across both the data center and the cloud. And then I think one of the other pieces I tend to talk a lot of customers about is actually the whole management piece, observability, and how do we actually manage multiple silos now? Because we've got data centers, we're running in AWS, we're running in Azure, we've got little bits and pieces all over the place. We've added Kubernetes, and that's another management challenge. So those kind of broader management conversations, how do we manage across these environments? I talked to a lot of customers about that as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting in kind of the way. If I go back to kind of the thing about AI, because everybody's talking that conversation, and we're having that on an increasing amount of podcasts here as well, talking about kind of AI. But it's interesting, isn't it? We started this out talking about how people sometimes look at data as the sort of storage as the unsexy part of it. But actually, if you want to take advantage of AI, then knowing the data sets you've got, knowing what's valid and what's valuable and what's current is a huge part of that. And it's saying, and as you're moving these things into the public cloud, so you can use some of the public cloud services around analytics or AI and Gen AI, actually knowing what you're moving and moving it securely. So I suppose while we might think storage is unsexy, it's absolutely doing that right now is as relevant now as it's ever been.
Yeah, and the data sets are getting bigger, as we talked about. So being able to do it faster, being able to wrangle this data between multiple environments on-prem and cloud, being able to create 1,000 clones of a huge data set for the purposes of AI. Well, you can't afford to buy 1,000 times the storage, but if you've got technology that can create 1,000 copies at zero cost, then that's something that really integrates. And it's the speed of delivery and the API integration of those storage features effectively into these platforms that really help customers get towards the outcome of what they're trying to achieve for AI much quicker. And you're right about the optimizing the data first, because the more suboptimal data set you use for AI, the longer it takes to get an answer. If you can use a defined optimal set of data up front, you'll get to results quicker as well. So there's lots of kind of, tie-ins around the technology there that we can do.
It's funny, isn't it? You see this in lots of things in life, but it's funny how things that we all thought were cool kind of 10 years ago, cloning, snapshotting, for people who are familiar with the storage industry, these are things that I think it's fair to say aren't unique to NetApp. These are things that many of the enterprise storage vendors are doing. And while we think, well, they're not very cool to talk about them now because doesn't everybody do it? But it's funny how this stuff kind of goes around. It's cyclic, isn't it? In that actually, as you've just said, Grant, if you're looking at AI and analytics and moving data to the cloud, these technologies become hugely important for speed, capacity, cost optimization, efficiency, automation. They all become hugely valuable. So that feels like a good place to start, that all things in IT are cyclic. Feels like today's takeaway.
That's absolutely the case.
So guys, let's see, any kind of final thoughts?
No, for me, NetApp has always given system admins and businesses options. Where Grant started to say, NetApp has got a unified platform. I think that is still the case today, as it was back when NetApp started.
Yeah, we're unified now, not just across protocols on premise, but across
everywhere.
Clouds as well.
Yeah.
And that
Absolutely,
unified data platform really makes a huge advantage because you can reduce the complexity of managing your data and know that you can deliver the same enterprise capabilities in all of these environments rather than have differences of capability in each different one. So
I think for me, we've spent the last 10 months on this journey of knowledge. We've been talking about endpoint security, managed cyber security as a service, MDR, but we've never really got into protecting the data via the data applications. And I think that's the key takeaway from me today is the speed of recovery. If it identifies, this is what I'm taking away. If we can identify a threat, it'll take a snapshot and we can recover that very quickly in seconds. I think you were saying when you were in Las Vegas.
Snapshot restores seconds.
And I think, because we've spoken about protecting everywhere, but this kind of brings it, it almost completes the circle, doesn't it? Going, you've got to be everywhere and here. You can't just be, because this is what they're targeting is. They want to get this data because this is how, this is what they're going to target and this is what you're going to pay for them to, to re-recover this data. So, yeah.
Well, and we're confident of the technology that we offer a ransomware guarantee on being able to recover that data on the premise system as well. So, yes, absolutely. It's not just about the perimeter protection. It's about how do you protect the data once it's where they're actually attacking, being able to detect that, protect it, recover in seconds. That's all really important to do. So.
Well, I think it's been great, and Grant, thank you for your time. And I think to sum it up, I want to pinch the phrase that you've just used, that you've got to have management and security of your data everywhere and here. What a great phrase. So you can have that and trademark it. And every time I use it, I'll give you £1. So that's I'm already have £1 out. But hey guys, been great. Grant, really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Cheers, Grant.
If you've enjoyed this episode, which I'm sure you have, I think loads of insightful thoughts there around kind of the future of data management. You want to make sure you don't miss any future episodes of Tech Takeaways, and do subscribe. You can subscribe here on YouTube or in all good homes of podcasts. So until next time, Gents, Grant, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. We'll see you soon.